Welcome to the show that looks at truth, fiction, and reality with a smirk. I'm Aaron Peterson.
I'm Amanda Sink.
I'm Zach Parkerson.
And thank you for listening to Smirk. This podcast is going to be a combination of creative storytelling and spirited discussion. First, we're going to hear a story from one of our authors, myself, Amanda, or Zach, and this week it is going to be Amanda's turn. We don't know what the story is, we don't know what the context is, and then we're going to discuss afterward what we think, what Zach and I think the moral of the story is, and then we're going to discuss the topic a little more in depth. After it's all said and done, we'll find out whether or not that story was true. And now, it's time for a story.
Ashley is a longtime sufferer of panic attacks due to her anxiety for which she is receiving therapy. Her boyfriend Jake has not personally experienced anxiety, but has witnessed Ashley's panic attacks before. They've been together for a while at this point and have endured a lot in that time. After Jake comes home from a night out drinking, Jake and Ashley end up in an argument. Ashley expresses her concern regarding how much Jake has been drinking lately, and that she didn't know where he was or if he was okay. Jake is dismissive and starts yelling at her for even bringing it up and asking questions. Tensions rise, and this emotional upset leads Ashley into a panic attack. As she's been instructed before through therapy, she goes to another room, lays down on the floor, and takes deep breaths to relieve herself. Jake approaches her with comments about how she needs to learn how to handle her emotions better, laughs at her, mocking her crying and panic attack, essentially taunting her. A final tear falls down Ashley's face at the realization of what her life has become.
Man.
Short story.
That's over?
Wow, that is short.
Is that the ending?
It was just a short story to get the discussion going.
No, it was a good story, and it was very succinct. It's just a matter of, I was surprised by how it ended. Very dark. Very dark.
Now I would like to know what you guys think the moral of the story is, that short, sweet story.
Sweet and beautiful, I gotta say. Is the moral that women are too whiny?
That would be incorrect. Wrong.
Way to kick this podcast off.
Darn. Thought I had it.
Try again.
Man, it really kind of feels like, in terms of panic attacks, that the worst thing you could do is, when someone has a serious condition, you need to give them positive affirmation, not negative affirmation.
Right. Is the moral something about learning about your significant other's issues and responding accordingly?
These are both parts of the discussion, but not exactly the main moral I would like to get to.
So what's your main moral?
My moral of the story is about mental health, our perceptions of it, and how emotional abuse compares with physical and sexual abuse in terms of those perceptions.
Say that again, so for the cheap seats, because I'm
so
not
it's
that
about
smart.
It's obviously about mental health,
right?
And it's about how we perceive mental health, how we perceive the stigma around it, and how those perceptions lead to a differing level of perceived severity from types of mental illnesses.
If you put it into just one moral, what would it be of all that? Just the perception of mental health?
Perception of mental health.
That's a pretty bold one.
It is.
You're very deep.
Amanda's going for a deep episode right off the bat. I didn't get perception of mental health. I got more of the bullying aspect. I got more of he's fanning the flames of her condition. I got that a little bit.
So when you think of somebody who is mocking anxiety and you think of somebody who is laughing at it, they generally don't take it seriously. I feel like it kind of depends on the mental illness for how people perceive it and how severe they perceive that mental illness to be. In this scenario, there's somebody who is experiencing anxiety, which to some is perceived as just kind of deal with it. Figure it out on your own. It's just you not being able to handle your emotions. Whereas when you look at it from a psychological standpoint, it is a mental illness. It's a disease of the mind. And so there isn't as much control for your emotions when you're dealing with them with anxiety. And this significant other in this relationship clearly has the perception that anxiety is not that significant to where you can't control it. You should be able to figure it out yourself. So that's why it kind of goes more into the perceptions of anxiety.
Okay. So how do you want to break this discussion out?
Well, I kind of want to know what do you guys think perceptions of anxiety are from other people? Not necessarily your own right now. You can tell me those after. But how do you think other people perceive?
I don't get anxious, Amanda. I have no anxiety whatsoever. I am Keanu Reeves in life.
The man has multiple Academy Awards.
I'm very smooth, relaxed, beach guy. Mm-hmm. No, I think everybody has anxiety.
But do you think people perceive anxiety to be a legitimate mental illness, to like a health condition?
I don't.
I would say most people do not understand anxiety. And in fact, the story resonates a little bit with me more than you might think, because actually my wife suffers from anxiety quite a bit. And when it started happening, I really didn't understand it as a mental health concern at all. I just, in my head, it was a lot of, wow, you really gotta learn to check your stuff at the door here. As I spend more time with it, as we've learned more about it, it is something that can't be controlled, and it's your own mind screaming at you about all these terrible things that are going to happen or could occur, and you can't shut them out. And sometimes it does cripple you to the floor, and you need people there reaffirming that things are going to be okay. But I would say anxiety is still struggling to be thought of as an acceptable mental health issue.
Yeah, I can say that I've seen people I know that have gone through anxiety, and they actually are, because of the perception of it, that it's not a real thing. They don't actually believe they should get medication or seek therapy or get help in any way, shape, or form, because there's a perception and a stigma of that kind of mental health, where people believe that, well, if you do that, you're weak. If you can't handle pressure, you can't handle stress, you're weak. And that's just simply not the case. It's simply not the case. But the perception is that it's not a real thing. It's a self-induced problem as opposed to an actual medical condition. And that perception, I think, by a lot of people is if you have anxiety attacks or you see someone having an anxiety attack, that's weakness in some respect, which isn't the case, but I feel like that is the perception. Definitely the stigma.
And that's actually one of my next discussion points is, obviously you guys both agree that there is some sort of a stigma around it. Mm-hmm. So my question then becomes, which you sort of answered already, so I guess it's on to Zach now.
Boom. I'm out.
Why do you think there is that stigma around something that is a legitimate health condition?
Well, I think Aaron summed it up well, that it's just perceived weakness, that it's, you can't handle life. We're all going through terrible things. We all get anxious. It's just that these people, the ones who are suffering attacks from it, they just say haven't learned how to cope with life. And it's not true, obviously. And it's just, that is definitely the lasting stigma out there in the ether right now.
Well, what do you think, Amanda? I mean, it's your story. So obviously this came to you from a certain place. So how do you feel about it?
Well, there's absolutely a stigma around every bit of mental health, and especially things like anxiety and depression. And when it comes to anxiety, I feel like there's two sides of reasoning, and I think it differentiates between genders. I think for men, it's mostly perceived as a weakness if they experience those emotions, because men shouldn't, in society's standards, they shouldn't be experiencing emotions. You should be masculine enough to handle your own emotions and not outwardly deal with them. And I think for women, it's perceived negatively because it's seen as baggage for women, I feel like.
BBC, right? That's how people perceive it.
Yeah, just you're dramatic. You have too much baggage. You're damaged goods. For women in particular, and for men in particular, just that they're weak and that they can't manage their emotions. And I feel like it kind of blends over a little bit for each gender, but I feel like there are more specifics when it comes to those reasonings between the genders. And I think it really just comes down to societal standards and how they believe people should be dealing with emotions, or if emotions shouldn't exist. In a lot of minds, people don't think that men should feel anything or outwardly express that. They should just bottle it up and deal with it within themselves. And women are the ones who are overly dramatic and always expressing their emotions, and it's so terrible.
I mean, there's some truth to that.
There's some truth to every story.
There is some
my joke got yelled at. Come on.
It is one of those things where I think a lot of it is because of, well, obviously it's upbringing, it's how you were raised, the conditioning in your home. I think especially it has to do with age brackets. Younger people, millennials, I hate that term, but millennials, younger people that are having fun and have electronics, that younger group, I think, is more open to it. I think that every generation has gotten a little bit better. But I mean, you go back to like our grandparents or great-grandparents' generation where you weren't allowed to be anything but a man. You better be out there. You better chop some wood. You better fix some cars. You can't do anything except be a man. And the woman, well, you can't do anything except dishes and raise kids and all that stuff. That was the great-grandparents'
Don't forget
generation.
sandwiches and dinner.
Well, everybody needs a sandwich. Yeah, I'm hungry. I've been chopping wood and been fixing cars. I'm hungry. Been on the roof all day. You get to the next generation. Every generation has gotten a little bit better, a little bit more open, a little bit more accepting. Progressive, yeah. And mental health, I think, is one of the last bastions of acceptance. It's one of those things where you don't really hear many people getting on a soapbox about it, but more people should, because most of us have something. And anxiety is a big thing, especially in this day and age with so much pressure. And I mean, hell, not even just work pressure, but social pressure. So many people feel pressure from things like Facebook and social media, which I don't know if that ever really gets talked about, but it's a true thing. I think people actually genuinely feel pressure from social media. They're constantly looking to see how many likes their picture got. And if they put out a post, they're looking at how many people are commenting on it, and it matters to them. It's an actual thing. They get anxiety if people don't like something that they say or do.
Maybe I don't look good enough, or
everything.
Said the wrong thing and offended too many people, or they just don't care, sort of thing you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that our culture has evolved into a Kardashians episode has really created a lot more anxiety for a lot of people, because they have this constant need for approval or adoration or acceptance. There's something everybody needs now. And everybody has emotions. Now they're outpouring, where they used to bottle them all in. I don't know which one's worse, but there's some middle ground I think we need to get to.
That makes me think of the growing concern of FOMO, the fear of missing out, and how you kind of get ostracized if you don't go see Star Wars in the opening weekend, and how that...
You should be ostracized for that. Go see Star Wars opening.
See what I'm saying?
Way to feed that.
Opening night.
Come on.
Come on.
Way to feed that devil. You're part of the problem, Amanda. I'm glad you wrote the story so we knew more about you.
Look, I'm just saying, don't miss Star Wars.
You're talking about the perception of mental health and how it's not a big deal. I don't know if I'm just kind of like on a weird soapbox or a tangent right now, but speaking of that fear of missing out and the way he is feeling anxiety, and speaking to Star Wars, which has been out by the time you're listening to this, they're running ads right now that are like, you don't want anyone to spoil this for you. And it's just kind of feeding on that growing social media anxiety that Aaron was talking about.
In entertainment, you have to see something before to avoid seeing the spoilers online. And so there's, I guess, some anxiety, too, of I got to make sure I see this show before I get on social media. But social media has my family and I like to check on them or whatever else.
Well, there's anxiety about watching TV now.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, like, if I don't see Walking Dead before everybody else, oh my God, or Game of Thrones, oh my God, I got to see it. I don't want to be spoiled.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these weird anxieties that our parents and grandparents, they never had any of that, because all they did was sit around chopping wood, reading books. That's it.
Well, and as
fixing
culture,
cars.
Fixing
a lot of cars.
A lot of cars, yeah.
As culture evolves, you're going to have different things to create those anxieties. So although they might not have been experiencing anything that we're experiencing, they probably experienced anxieties that we'll never experience. I mean,
like
even
war.
like severe racial inequality.
So I mean that also. I mean, when you were required to list yourself to go into war,
it's called a draft.
Yes,
kids.
we don't have that anymore. Obviously, you're not required to do so. But I, as a
Let's
younger,
not get too ahead of ourselves. The way things are going, it's very possible it could come back.
you never know. But I couldn't imagine having to be, as a man, I couldn't imagine being required to put my life on the line and deal with everything that comes along with war. That would create a lot of anxiety within me, just every day worrying if my name's going to come up in the draft, like the Hunger Games.
Which leads me back to my original point that women are whiny.
Hey!
That's Zach at smirkpodcast.com.
So my final discussion piece that I'm curious of, and this has kind of been something I've been working on for a while, do you think that women, in particular women, see this sort of emotional abuse as severe as they would sexual or physical abuse?
Oh, wow. Thanks for throwing that question to two guys.
I know,
That's
but I'm
great.
curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'm going to let Zach go first.
So he
Okay,
can
great.
offend everyone first.
Yep.
No, I don't think they see it quite the same way, but I think that the media, our television, our movies, our stories tend to focus on either the physical or the sexual abuse. So they're more aware of that and taught to fear more, I feel like. Even was it an HBO show, Pretty Little Lies or whatever?
Big Little Lies, yeah.
Big Little Lies really seemed to lean in on the physical and the sexual abuse more than the emotional, I would say. And I think that's true of most storytelling. So I think that plays into our perceptions of things.
Perception is based on what is the biggest and boldest, right? The scariest thing in the room. And I don't think people see anxiety in the same context as they do sexual assault. Sexual assault is a horrific thing. Physical abuse is a horrific thing. Anxiety, I still think a lot of it has to do with people feel like it is partially their fault. They can't manage life or things or whatever it is that's stressing them out. They can't manage it. So therefore, to them, they think it's now I know some people feel that way with sexual assault and physical abuse. They feel like it's their fault. It's my fault. I brought this on even when they absolutely did not. But I really think anxiety is different in a respect. They can justify it to themselves how it is their fault. And not in I know it's not my fault, but it is my fault, which I feel like is what most assault victims feel like. With anxiety, I think they really do believe they have responsibility in it because I see other people managing all the things they're doing and I just can't do it. I'm just not built for it. I can't handle whatever it is. So I don't think it's ever seen the same way. What do you think? You're a lady.
Well, let me get into that once I tell you if this story was true or not. So
Yeah, I want to know, is the story true or not?
This is a true story.
It feels true.
It is.
The story's true?
It is.
I want to punch that guy in the face.
Yeah, to preserve anonymity, I won't delve too much into the specifics of it, but I can say that this character, Ashley, this was a long chapter in her life and that book has closed. So she's moved on and, it was some years that she was dealing with that situation. But the reason I brought this story into it is because I actually incorporated it into a psychology research study that I conducted recently. And I basically gave 8 scenarios on a questionnaire that were approved through an IRB to be given to participants.
Whoa. What's an IRB? I'm not smart.
It's a review board.
Okay.
Yeah, so they just have to
What does the I stand for? I understand the RB now.
We don't need to know. You don't need to know.
I need to know. So learning endeavor.
Institutional Review Board is what it
Thank
stands
you.
for.
Jeez.
Wow. Why don't you just call it la-di-da?
I don't know why it was a secret.
So when I basically gave 8 different scenarios, some of them included no abuse in the scenario at all. Some of them included financial, emotional, physical, and sexual. They were given and they were randomized the order, so not every person had the same order of scenarios on their questionnaire. And it was women participants only. And they took these questionnaires, then they would rate on a Likert scale of 0 to 10 what they thought that the level of abuse was in each scenario.
Oh, wow.
And so for this scenario in particular, and I did moderate it a little bit more on the questionnaire, but I wanted to expand a tiny bit more through us. But what I found was women tend to recognize when there is and isn't abuse, because in the non-abusive scenarios, the mean was about 0.2 to 1.46. That was their average rating on a scale of 0 to 10. So they're obviously not finding much abuse in those scenarios that aren't abusive. Guy forgets to take out his trash 2 times in a row, apologizes to his girlfriend. Not super abusive. So
That is good to know.
Well, she should take out the trash.
he had agreed to it. She was cleaning the entire house. He went out to have drinks with his friends, forgot. She said, hey, will you make sure you do it tonight when you get home? He forgot again, did it in the
I
morning.
like this guy. He makes sense to me.
This guy sounds like a hero.
So
Does he have a cape?
I don't think he does. In terms of the physical and sexual scenarios, those were rated at about 9.3 to a 9.49. That was the average for those types of scenarios out of a 10. So most people didn't deviate from that. They recognized when there isn't abuse, and they recognized for sexual and physical, this is very abusive. But when it came to the emotional and verbal abuse, it was closer to a 7.49. And that was the average for that. And it deviated a lot more too. So some people rated it much lower, some rated it much higher. And I just found it interesting that although they're able to recognize, women are able to, and this is in a college setting, they're able to recognize when there is or isn't abuse, which means they're understanding that there's not abuse in some scenarios. They're just not rating the severity of emotional to the same extent that they are physical and sexual. And the emotional scenarios were still, I mean, they had profanity in them. They had very controversial tones to them, you know, in the things that the characters were saying. And it was always, I kept every scenario the same, where it was the female was the significant other, their significant other was the male aggressor. So that way it didn't deviate for gender roles. So there was, you know, those sorts of things. But that's kind of why I wanted to bring it in, because I just finished doing all of my statistical analysis for it. And it just really kind of concerned me and how people perceive anxiety in particular, because the scenario was fluctuated all over the place in terms of how people rated it. And so I was just kind of curious, and I hope to hear from listeners what they think of this too.
Wow. That was deep.
Very deep.
Wasn't it deep, Zach? I don't think it was deep.
Oh.
What just happened?
What?
All I heard is, oh.
All I heard was, oh. But before we go, Amanda, you got to tell us, what's the title of your story?
Perceptions of mental health.
Yeah, that would have been a giveaway.
Yep.
We nailed it. We nailed the moral, though.
Yeah, there you go. Well, she told us the moral, so that made it easier.
Yes.
Well, speaking of listeners, when we get them, we will be choosing a listener story each week as we go to also discuss at the end of the episode. So a short story, you want to send it, and we'll briefly read it. If you want to include your moral, feel free, and we'll discuss that. Or we'll try to figure it out. It's up to you. But if you were interested in doing that, you can send it to mystory@smirkpodcast.com. That's mystory@smirkpodcast.com. Well, you know, we do have a Facebook group. You can join in the conversation. That's Smirk on Facebook. Just find that. We're on Twitter @SmirkPodcast. And be sure to subscribe to Smirk on Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Stitcher, whatever your podcast app of choice is. Please do that. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And as you write your own life story, always remember to tell it with a smirk.